Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being sessions. Today we are talking about exquisite anger. I'm Alex Pruitt, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach with a BDSM and kink focus. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. So today I'm really excited to finally bring in this topic of exquisite anger. Anger is one of those emotions that gets so misunderstood and has been for many generations within our society. Um, and then the way it ends up presenting can come across as being very toxic. And there's several different ways that it can show up as being very toxic. And that's what I want to kind of like start diving into here, but then also how to start transitioning it so you can actually use anger as this immensely invaluable tool or ally within your life so you can help transition it and be in that greatest alignment for you having a life that is full of pleasure, full of thriving and deep connection with others. All right, so let's get into it a bit. As I was mentioning, there's a lot of social conditioning that comes up around anger. I know for me, growing up in a female body, I was taught that anger was not an emotion that was okay to express, was okay to be in. So I actually learned how to shut it down and repress it within my nervous system. That if I started getting those cues of being angry, it was something I tried to push away or avoid. And actually, as I started moving through my journey to find healing within my own body, acceptance within my own body, understanding and love, what I ended up finding was it was actually easier for me to cry and be seen and witnessed in those spaces than it was to be angry. There was one instance in particular where I was diving more into tapping into the primal sensations and emotions that come up with anger. And I actually had a big boundary cross when I was going through this particular practice. And my partner at the time actually came into the bedroom, which we had already had conversations where it was defined as this is a private space when I am like in workshops, when I am doing this type of work, unless you are invited in. Now, he could have knocked on the door, he could have done many other things that wouldn't have had it be a boundary violation for me. But in this instance, he actually decided to sneak into the room, and I ended up finding him in that space, kind of like watching me over the bed, kind of like a little kid who was seeing something they weren't supposed to see. Well, when that happened, I initially saw his facial expression and wanted to laugh, and then I had just this bolt of heat run through the center of my body, and I was doing my best to maintain, but I recognized I felt immensely angry. And he actually came and sat on the edge of the bed near me, and I looked up at him and I told him, "I'm really angry right now. I need you to get out." And he looked at me and he actually kind of laughed, which ended up exasperating my anger a little bit more. So I ended up saying what I had just said with more force. What I realized later on was he was used to expressions of anger that went into the like outward projection. So having to yell or scream or physically lash out at another person before he recognized that a person was angry. So, me telling him I was angry because he wasn't seeing the other cues that would tell him this person's angry, I need to like get away. um, he didn't actually believe me. So, he left himself in that space, even though I was being very clear in that moment on like what I needed, that I had this emotion coming up, I was literally sitting there with my hands on my knees, like balled in fists, because I did not want to physically lash out at him. I was doing everything in my power to keep myself and him safe in that moment. But it's one of the ways that anger can get so misconstrued, is that one, we're not used to people just directly telling us in a calm way that they're feeling angry, right? We'll wait for the bigger cues, and we're not actually listening to the more subtle information that's there. We also do that within our own body. And the more we learn to repress anger, the more distance we end up getting between ourselves and being able to recognize it at the more subtle levels. So, females do tend to get this conditioning of it's better to repress our anger. Anger is not acceptable from those living within female bodies. There was actually some studies I read about when Hillary Clinton and Trump were going through the election process and doing their campaigns and everything like that. They had actually done a bunch of studies around that point in time, a group of scientists, I don't know who it was specifically, um, doing different analysis of facial expressions. And pretty much Hillary, so the female being, ended up like needing to portray either a neutral or smiling facial expression. And they would actually see dips in the poll if she ended up having any flashes of anger or agitation, frustration show up on her face. Where they've actually done those same studies with men, and men don't tend to have impact associated with them showing frustration, anger, annoyance, anything along those lines. So there is really high social conditioning that comes up around this, not just what gets taught to us like in our immediate family units. It has been something that has been handed down for generations and generations and generations. Where I initially got my messaging around it was from my mom. And this is really normal to have experienced. It doesn't make it okay, because, again, it taught me a pattern that having anger, being angry, any of those things wasn't safe, wasn't okay. And I learned how to repress it, right? But we're getting into this idea of generational trauma now. And what I do want to clarify is usually, if you look back through the generations, these things have been handed down. And so while I could go back and say, ugh, my mom, I'm so mad at her, which would be justified because she could have done her own work, she didn't really know any better. And we really only know what we know. And once we know that thing, we can't change the past. But what we can do is decide to take actions to change how we approach the situations in the future. And that is one of those valuable keys, is recognize where you've been a victim, where you feel angry about the things you were taught or the injustices you've experienced, and so on. Like, allow yourself to have that space, and don't expect that those people have to change or that things would have been any better if they'd been different in the past. Because again, you can't change what actually occurred in your past. Again, you can take an empowered stance and then change how you respond in those situations, how you show up to those situations, and for yourself above all and anything else. The way anger tends to come across with male bodied individuals is they get a lot of emotional repression around sadness, sadness being a weakness, right? And they tend to get more of this pass on that aggression with anger is appropriate. That's probably why you see a lot more males tending to get in physical fights. Obviously, there are things like testosterone and things going into that as well. But there is also this higher social acceptance of males being physically violent verbally abusive through their anger and that being dismissed, right? And I'm going to say right now, I don't agree that any of that should be dismissed. It's causing harm, but it is this space where men have gotten more of this leeway with having an explosive version of anger come out, which is toxic on many levels. And at the same time, like it also creates this unsafety, not only in the people around them, but even within their own beings that, oh, if I get angry, I'm going to punch somebody in the face, right? I know I would feel more hesitant about myself if I was scared that every time I got angry, I might hurt somebody I love. And I personally don't think that is a huge fear that any of us need to live with. It's when we go into these states of dismissing, pushing down, having it in our shadows, that when it comes out, it is destructive. Destructive either within ourselves or to the world around us. All right, let's talk a little bit more about how anger can show up in these different ways that are toxic, that are destructive, that create chaos. And there's two different ways I have seen this happening, right? One is that outward expression. And this tends to come across in the fight model of primal fear responses. And I will try to tack that in on the YouTube video. But you can kind of see under this fight model that when we're in a primal fear responsive fight, a lot of it is more focus directed outwards from us. So this is the space where you're blaming everyone else. It's the space where you're more likely to hit, more likely to punch, more likely to bite, push on somebody else, move towards the threat. It's that very primal drive that has us want to protect ourselves through fighting. Again, this is normal in every single one of our systems. It is something that has been evolutionarily passed down. And again, we get conditioned out of connecting with our primal. And when we do that, it comes across in toxic and aggressive ways that are abusive and detrimental to the relationships around us. Again, I don't want to create those spaces. I want to help you create spaces of thriving and connection. Having this information so you can recognize the behaviors in yourself and in others, highly valuable. So there's two other levels that fall into the primal fear response table, and those are flight and freeze. And we're kind of going to skip past those two, but feel free to pause this if you are on YouTube and take a look at that charting just because you can see different behavior types that fall under those that specifically fall under human behavior. Some of those will show up in animal behavior, but we don't necessarily focus on a dog being OCD, right? Or a cat being more apathetic. We'll tend to categorize these as, or if anything, as they need to go to a vet for what's showing up. Well, that last step on this chart is fawn, which isn't as well known with this table. I actually went through school for a biology major. Fawn was never mentioned in animal behavior as one of these steps, but as I've gotten into the world of psychology and the analysis of the human mind and behavior patterns, fawn stands out a lot more. It is a socially conditioned fear response to keep ourselves safe. And humans are very social animals, so it makes sense that this has adapted in as well. The fawn response is more of the inward expression of the emotion when it is getting repressed over time. And what ends up happening is you end up building this immense pressure within your physiological system. But rather than that fight going outwards, it's all directed inwards at yourself. So, one way to think of this is if you're finding yourself falling into a whole lot of negative loops of thinking about who you are, your value, your worthiness, that you're unlovable, suicidal ideation, that you just want to disappear, everything would be better if you were just gone. That falls into that fawn area. It's the area where you end up losing your identity. You fall into people pleasing. Um, you can be very, very apathetic and just wanting to give everyone everything you are so that they stay happy. You are not focused on your needs. You have very weak boundaries if you are falling into this area because you are not standing up for your authentic yes and your authentic no. You are putting yourself aside in most of these instances. But where that becomes, like you can see in the fight, it's very outward based, right? Of like you're physically attacking other people. In the fawn response, you are internally being a terrorist to yourself. And personally, where this came up is I actually noticed this strain of thoughts coming up in me last night. And I've done a lot of work to get to the point of where I am with it, but I was able to sit with it in a space where I was alone and just let myself move through those waves of emotions. But it's still not easy to hear and receive when those things come up, even though I have been really diligently doing this work for about 6 years. It still can feel very painful. It can feel very uncomfortable. I still get the like voice running through my head that's like, I don't want to feel here. I don't want to exist. This is painful. It's uncomfortable, right? But if you can sit with it and allow yourselves to move through the waves of it, being kind and compassionate with yourself along the way, just witnessing what you're going through, then on the other side of it, again, there can be really high value. There can be this like gem and light of allowing yourself to see where you can hold better boundaries for yourself. I can tell you, typically when my anger gets triggered, um, the thing I have found is it's getting triggered because either somebody else or myself is asking me to take on more responsibility than is actually mine, or it's crossing a boundary for me. And again, like I want to say that took me 2 years through my personal work and working directly with a counselor to even be able to weed that out. Before that, anger just seemed like this kind of useless emotion that came up every once in a while, and I didn't know why it was there and I didn't want it to be there. And then I started finding the value point. And so now I can actually take the time to slow down with that emotion when it's coming up and say, okay, what's here? I listen to the narrative. I listen to the thing that wants to blame other people. I listen to the thing that wants to blame me. And then I sit with it and I just slow down with it. That is one of the biggest things we neglect to do is just allowing it to be there and slowing the fuck down with it. Because when we do that, we can actually get past the waves of anger, get into the actual sadness or hurt that's underneath it, the thing that's wanting to be defended, the thing that's wanting to be guarded, the thing that's scared underneath about what may happen in the future, right? Or what has happened in the past. And then we can actually get to that piece. Like I mentioned before, as a female, it was easier for me to feel sadness and to express sadness than it was for me to actually tap in with anger. But when I was going through the process of just jumping to sadness, I was actually kind of creating this bypass in my own system where I wasn't letting myself actually touch on the anger. So I wasn't getting the fuller message of what was there and able to see what the value was in that step of allowing myself to feel angry, to feel the heat in my chest, to feel the part of me that wants to punch or kick or scream. And it can be scary to do that. I'm not going to deny that. It was immensely scary for me when I would end up expressing anger, especially in an argument with another person, right? When I'd hit that point of overwhelm, I would almost always hit this point of having this really deep guttural scream. And there were many times where I would hold that back, or I'd wait until I got in my car and then just scream at the top of my lungs because of the amount that had built up for pressure in my system. There were other times, like while I was going through my separation and divorce, where I remember sitting on like a kitchen chair and my ex-husband and I are having a conversation and I felt so unheard and I was so confused by the things he was saying as an argument back, like denying my experience of what was going on, that it just belted out of me, and I literally hopped up out of the chair, ran into my room, and went and sobbed because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to be with it. And again, that is why we are having this conversation space. This is why I felt so drawn and have felt so drawn through so much of what I have created through coaching programs and working with other people to help bring them back to this place of safety with their anger. And that safety, again, it's not the toxic extremes of the lashing out or lashing in, but finding a balance with it. Now I will tell you, part of my own journey meant that I needed to allow myself a way to tap in with the bigger waves of anger. That is the journey I took. There may be other routes of achieving that, but from my own experience, I needed to feel it on those higher levels to kind of release that pressure that had built up, to even let me tap into it because I didn't know how to recognize it in my system at that higher level or at any of the lower levels than that high one. Well, then as I allowed myself to tap into it at that level, I got to notice more of the nuanced sensations that went along with feeling anger. What sort of thoughts popped up? What sort of narratives? What my body wanted to do in those instances. Again, like screaming, punching, kicking, these ways of defending myself or trying to protect myself. And then I was able to work back through the layers to find the more subtle cues. And I will be completely transparent. There are still times where I have anger come up on levels where I just want to scream. And again, it's that deep, guttural, animalistic, like scream. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with me still hitting the point where I want to punch or kick something. The high value for me, because I lived in such a fawn state with my anger at this point, is even recognizing that that's what my body wants to do, not shaming it, not judging it, but then trying to allow it healthy expressions and outlets. And when you do that, you allow that energy to move. So when you have defaulted back to this fawn state with your anger over and over again, it allows you to recognize it. Again, in the fawn state, you've got weak boundaries. You're not speaking up for your no, you're losing your identity. Like if you like have the thought line going through your head of I feel lost, there is a very good potential. Like if you're not physically lost in the world around you, in the woods, like you feel lost in a situation you're experiencing, that you may be in the fawn state. I, I just want to be transparent based on what I have experienced and the research I've done going into all this. And that's okay. It's recognizing where you're at again, and then being able to start taking baby steps forward. I always come back to baby steps. It was something that my ex husband had shown me as a movie a long time ago, with Bill Murray and him having some sort of psychosis. I can't remember what it was, but it comes back to this like, it's baby steps. And if you have been living in this existence of either the explosive expression of anger or the high repression of it, so in a massive fight or free or fawn response, then it is going to be baby steps. You're going to take small incremental steps, because if you all of a sudden just drastically shift to the other, like you will find the balance point somewhere in the middle at some point. It's also likely that you cause yourself trauma. Let's say, like, you've been in fawn and all of a sudden you're like screaming during an argument and yelling and like you want to punch a wall. You're going to validate to your nervous system why anger isn't safe. And same with the inverse. If you've been in the habit for most of your life of punching walls and now you're trying to just repress your anger, then you can easily tip over into the state of fawn, which is the opposite extreme. And again, that inward self destruction. So there are some very simple things you can do on your own. And there are also groups, there's workshops, there's all sorts of resources where you can start exploring this in a group setting, which I will say can be immensely healing on its own. Like, I recommend, if you are on any sort of healing journey, self discovery journey, self work journey, whatever it may be, self love, relationship expansion, finding community of people who are on similar paths or doing similar types of work to you is hugely validating and hugely transformative, because you are literally trying to retrain yourself out of a way you have set your reality for your life, that you have been conditioned to believe your reality exists as. And now you're trying to tell your system, oh no, but there's other options. It may not believe you. And so the more you start exposing yourself to podcasts, to books, to, again, communities, to groups, and involving yourself with people who are also in this exploration or who have done that work, the more it helps validate, oh, this is possible. Oh, I can have this thing. Oh, anger doesn't have to be scary. Oh, I can have unconditional love. It's not just a fallacy, right? Like, you get to start opening this box you have created around yourself. And that can be scary. It can feel very unknown, and the unknown can feel kind of petrifying at times. It is a risk within our mind body system to start expanding our understandings, to start expanding our consciousness, and consider the fact that, like, we are perpetually learning. Like, our learning process does not stop just because we reached adulthood. And my guess is, if you are here, you are probably a lifelong learner on some level, whether you recognize that or not. Otherwise, I doubt you would even be considering listening to this thing or have listened 30 minutes into it. So, what are some of the ways that you can start getting comfortable being uncomfortable with your anger? So, you can start working with it. So, you can start accepting it as something that is potentially valuable in your life. And if not even finding the value in it yet, just something that is there and that exists within your system, right? That next phase away from that would be getting into understanding why it's there for you. And the last piece of it is even getting into loving it. And maybe you never get to that phase, maybe you never get past acceptance. And that's okay. Like there is no rights and wrongs in this space, but I will tell you, like, I highly advocate for getting to those spaces of understanding and love if you can, if you feel like you have that pull and that calling within you, because that that space within you is where that unconditional love is going to come from. And I'm sorry, but no one else, because other people are going to fuck up. They're going to hurt your feelings. You're going to feel angry at them, all the things. And no single other person, except for like parents, and they even have to take a break sometimes, can hold that container 24/7 for another person and themselves. So, learning on that base level how to do that for yourself, you can constantly fill your own cup, and then you're able to connect more deeply in relationships because you have this giving from a place of overflow rather than I'm doing this for you because I need it in return. So, one of the first things I really recommend is at some point in time, if you're feeling angry and you feel like you can hold this space for yourself, is to just go sit in a room by yourself. You can lock a door if you need to. Like, you want to create a physically safe environment for yourself as much as possible, right? It is much easier to allow ourselves to notice what's coming up and be present with it when we can create safety for our systems. I know for me, I've had fear responses, huge waves of just wanting to sob and cry, anger show up in public spaces where it's around like a group of, let's say, more than like two other people. And there's something in my nervous system that actually won't let me fully tap into my sensations and body when I am in those spaces. It holds back around the things that overall society has taught me are weaknesses. And so if I notice those lower subtle cues, I will actually remove myself to a space that feels more safe so I can give those emotions presence for myself. And maybe you're able to tap into those on a nuanced level in a group of people. Again, I don't want you lashing out at somebody else. I also don't want you repressing it and having to hold it in. So that way of mitigating and creating a physically safe container for yourself and for others, especially when it comes to anger, can be just finding a private space where you can close the door, lock it if you need to. What I want to invite you into when you do that is, one, you can journal about it. Two, you can, like, if you feel like you need to hit and kick or scream, if it's available, grab a pile of pillows and or blankets. You literally throw them all in the middle of the bed, in the middle of the floor, whatever it is. Just make sure that, like, when you're throwing a punch or kicking, that you're allowing yourself to like feel into your body. You're allowing yourself to feel into the strength in your arms, the strength in your legs. Because when you do that, you're allowing that energy to move. You're allowing yourself to tap into your strength, that very physical, primal side of you that wants to protect you. And again, this is a great way to help mitigate. Oh, I feel like punching something. You're not punching a wall and breaking your hand. I don't know how many guys I've known in my life who have done that. I don't recommend it. Um, or just gone and punched somebody else in the face. And I also don't recommend that. I don't want people to have assault charges or have to deal with the like prison system or any of those things. So please, like let's find ways to mitigate it and make it safe so you can actually tap into it rather than lashing outwards or inwards. So one thing I will recommend if you are going to go into these sorts of practices is when you are doing this, you're going to allow yourself to move the energy. So scream into the pillow, especially if you don't like you have neighbors or you don't want people hearing you scream, like screaming into the pillow can be immensely helpful because it's going to help muffle the sound. Um, but make sure you give yourself room to breathe because it can be much harder to breathe through a pillow and fully. The but in that same with pillows, hit, kick the pillows, like allow that to move. After a minute or so of allowing that like full energy to move, or at the point where like you feel kind of like this wave of emotion is decreasing a little bit, allow yourself to just sit and see what thoughts are coming up or what other emotions are coming up in that space. But you're also doing this to bring presence to your body and what it's needing now. It's literally allowing yourself to get into the present moment experience of allowing your body to move these emotions. And you may have other emotions come up. You may end up feeling a trembling inside of your body or waves of sadness, levels of fear. And it's, again, it's just bringing presence to what's coming up in that moment. Um, I definitely recommend if you have not gone through these sorts of practices before, if you feel high levels of unsafety with your own emotions, that reaching out to a coach, to some sort of professional, to a therapist, to somebody who works with somatic experiencing, someone in a professional range, a guide, a mentor, find someone to help guide you through these spaces. Not only can they help recognize different cues that may be coming up to help you pendulate the experience so you can process and integrate it on a much higher level, they're also going to help validate your experience. To me, it is not healthy for mentors and guides and coaches, therapists to deny anyone's experiences. Um, so, like, if you're running up across somebody who, like, I actually just had this come up in a space I led recently, where they're telling you, oh, you're feeling angry? Anger doesn't exist. It's all just something you made up in your head. In my personal experience, in my professional experience, that is not helpful and it is actually toxic because it leads to the instances of repression. And that mentality has been very touted for a long time as the way we handle ourselves. Just because something has been done a certain way for a long time does not mean, one, that it is the only way, and it also does not mean it is the best way. I do want to make that really clear. I worked in industrial or an industrial manufacturing chemical plant for a long time. And they had many processes on very physical basis of building metal where they even acknowledge just because we've done something a certain way for a really long time through the history of our company does not mean it's the best way. So we're open to other ideas. And that's the sort of mentality like you want from the people who are guiding and mentoring you. You want people who are open. You want people who are understanding. You want people who can approach a situation with, again, this open mind, not placing judgment and labels on what you experience. They may recognize, oh, it looks like you're feeling angry. Are you feeling angry? Right. But they're not telling you your anger doesn't exist or that, like, your boyfriend breaking up with you wasn't something that was painful, that you should just get over it, anything like that, right? To me, those spaces are about witnessing another person fully and then helping them find what the value key is in what they're going through. One thing I do really want to recommend, and it's because it was a really powerful practice for me, and at some point in the not so far future, I will actually probably lead a workshop on it or a breathwork practice. Um, but it is this really powerful experience of like you create a playlist that for you helps you kind of tap into that feeling of different emotions. Like if you listen to a song and you're like, that person sounds really angry, like you could use that one to tap into anger, right? Or if you come across another song and you're like, that person sounds really sad, or this brings up sadness in my system, then you could use that one for sadness. And pretty much it's kind of putting together this, like, I would say, like a 6 song playlist of songs that tap you into different emotions. And so, what this kind of looks like is you end up, let's say, playing a song that evokes anger, or that, like, you hear that song and that song sounds angry. And when you do that, you play the song and you allow yourself to feel into the emotion of anger. And again, for this, have pillows, have blankets, but let yourself feel into like getting angry and then let that move. And this, again, rationally doesn't have to make sense. You don't necessarily have to feel angry about any specific situation. There are also all sorts of triggers that you could utilize to help tap into your anger. So you could call on a personal memory, right, of feeling angry about something. You could also, let's say that you're highly against the social injustice towards women, and it starts, you like feel that little spark, that little heat of fire that starts in your system, the annoyance of like how men talk to women and like hypersexualize them, any of those things. Like you can use things that aren't necessarily like in your direct experience, but something that, again, creates that little spark. And for that song, or let's say even a minute of that song, you allow yourself to fully feel into anger, breathe with it, be with it, have the focused space of like, if I'm going to hit or punch anything, it's on these pillows and blankets. Again, not wanting to actually cause physical harm, just allow the energy to move. Then you're going to sit for a minute after that minute or so is done, or the song is done, however long you actually feel drawn to step into that. Again, this is just for an exploration so you can see how different emotions show up in your body. What you're going to do, song's over, let's say, then you're going to take a minute and just sit. You're going to sit in stillness. This is a meditation, it is a practice. I want to clarify, to me, what a meditation practice is are the moments where you are getting out of living in the past. So you're not depressed, you're not worrying about the future, you're not in anxiety. You are bringing your presence to the moment right now and what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you're sensing in your body, and allowing that to move. So, again, for a minute, for a couple minutes, let's say even 5 minutes, let yourself just sit with whatever sensations are there. Notice differences in temperature in your body, right? Are there spots that are hot, that are cold, that are warm, where you can't really sense what the temperature is? You can notice if there's any tingling, tightness, areas that feel more relaxed and calm, bubbly, sparkly, highly energized, or really fatigued and tired. Again, you're just noticing. Again, there is no rights or wrongs to what you're noticing. It's just about bringing presence to this moment. Then the next step would be tapping into another emotion. And I would recommend that as you do this, you pendulate between emotions that are typically ones you don't enjoy feeling to ones that you enjoy feeling. So let's say the next one is being happy, right? And the song Happy comes to mind because they're literally repeating the word happy over and over and over again within that song. But then, like, you just allow yourself to be in the emotion of happy. Again, you can recall on a personal memory where you felt really happy. You can recall, let's say, going on a roller coaster ride, like whatever that looks like for you. No rights or wrongs. It's just tapping into the emotion of feeling happy. Then again, you're going to come to a point of rest and sit with it after the song's over, after the 1 minute's over. And you're going to allow yourself to notice whatever is there for sensations in your body. And then you would start the next song. And again, we're pendulating. So this would be an emotion that you may have a harder time tapping into. So let's say sadness. And I'm using the examples of anger and sadness as hard to feel emotions. One, because they've been hard to feel emotions for me, but also because overall, on a larger societal scale, they tend to be emotions that people have a more difficult time with or label as bad or negative emotions. None of them are bad. The way they end up getting repressed and expressed can create harm, right? Or can be scary for people. I've also had the experience with sadness where people were scared of somebody else crying and feeling like they need to soothe it right away, that they need to fix it, they need to make it go away. And that's not the case for any emotions. Emotions are going to ebb and flow on their own, they come and go in waves. What an emotion is a set of sensations rising up within the body. And that particular set of sensations gives us a message about what we're experiencing in the world. That's all. And we end up putting all these catastrophic labels on them or having these huge reactions ourselves to an emotion coming up in another person's body that doesn't even directly involve us. If it does, like, they are more than welcome to share that, it's probably better that they share that after they've been allowed to move with that emotion, express that emotion, but hopefully in healthy ways, right? That's not going to cause huge detriment in a relationship, disconnections, right? So again, we were at anger, then happy, then sadness. Um, I think let's go through a few or go through a handful of other emotions just so you have an idea of other ones you can play with in that space. So, some other typically like feel good emotions that people enjoy feeling would be like ecstasy or bliss. Um, there's also like feeling goofy, right? I want to clarify any of those emotions that also tend to be labeled as things people enjoy feeling. There is somebody in the world somewhere who doesn't enjoy feeling that emotion because there was something that was made unsafe for them about it. Like they may have blocks around the level of happiness they're allowed to feel, the level of love they're allowed to feel. Like love could very inherently be an emotion that people don't enjoy feeling because there can be so much pain wrapped up around feeling loved. Um, some other ones will move into the spectrum of what people tend to consider negative emotions: disgust, jealousy. What else? I don't have an emotion chart up in front of me. There's a whole variety of emotions, and honestly, like you can just like go Google search emotionless, and my recommendation is like look through that list and find a handful of emotions that like you want to experience because you enjoy experiencing them. And like if you print it out, highlight them or highlight it in your phone app, like if you take a screenshot of it. And then also pick a handful of emotions off of that list that like you know that you don't necessarily like feeling or like being or like expressing, and take a handful of those. If there's an emotion out there that you completely do not recognize feeling or experiencing ever, one thing I would like to clarify is we all have the capacity, like, unless you have some block in your system, because I know there are people out there who do not feel emotions, and there is something going on with brain chemistry, neurological wiring, something along those lines. But the mass majority of people, like, feel all emotions, and it is a very small subset who do not. In that, like, if you're recognizing in that list, and like let's say you have the narrative like I'm just not an angry person so I never feel angry, or I'm just not a resentful person so like I don't even know what it would feel like to do that, be that. Those can be fun emotions to play with as well. You're going to have to gauge for yourself if that's an edge you want to play with. If it's something you never want to explore, that is perfectly all right as well. I just want to tell you again, for the mass majority of the population, each and every one of us have the capability of feeling every single one of those emotions. So, if you're finding something in there where it's like, well, I'm just not this, that is very likely a key piece to your shadow of your emotions, much like anger was for me, that probably holds some beautiful light and some beautiful wisdom for you that you have pushed away for a really long time. And again, these can get conditioned in very early. I want to say that my aversion for when I can remember, like, first having experiences around this to anger started when I was probably about 2 to 3 years old. I don't know for sure before that, but like in part of it, I know I was a toddler. And when I would get angry as a toddler, my mom being a single mother, she would end up putting me in a full body restraint. So she would wrap her arms and legs around my body to keep me from hitting her when I was angry. And for me, that definitely created this very restricted feeling. I am sure it created a lot more space as a toddler and young child of wanting to fight back and escape as well. But eventually, because I had this other being that was so much bigger than me restraining me, I would eventually have probably no other choice but to go into fawn and just give her what she wanted. And so it tapped down again, giving me that message of anger is not okay. The expression of anger is not okay. Being angry is not okay. And I pushed it away. I pushed it away deep and hard, and it would scare the hell out of me when it came up. And now, like, as much as there's still a part of me that's like, oh, I shouldn't feel that. Oh, like, this isn't good to feel. There's also the other part of me that's like, nope, we're going to sit with it. We're going to sit with it. We're going to create a safe space for ourselves and a safe space for other people so that we can find out what's really under here. Because the more I keep repressing it and pushing it back and then just changing who I am and my behaviors for other people, the stronger that anger is going to get. And the more likely it is that I end up going into either highly self destructive, let's say the suicidal ideation now turns into cutting myself, or actually unlifing myself, which again, I don't want for anyone else either. Um, or the high level intensity lashing out at other people. So I think I will leave you all with that for today. I will definitely be leading some sort of workshop or practice space in the near future for that anger or emotional awareness practice, because it was so valuable for me when I did that, because I didn't actually even know how to tap in with some of those emotions. All right, again, I'm Alex Pruitt, certified sex, love, and relationship coach and reality guide. If you are wanting a mentor or guide, if you're interested in working with me, then please go down below this video in the description and you will find links to my contact information. If you know that you want to work with me one-on-one, you can book a free discovery call and we can talk about what you're wanting to work through and work towards and see if we're a good match for working together through coaching. Other than that, I definitely want to invite you to join the Sexient Beings email list or the Sovereign Dom email list. And the Sovereign Dom is really about stepping into your empowerment and your authentic leadership within your life and your relationships. So again, it's always going to come back to within your life, because that's within your being, not just in the world around you. All right, until next time.